Welcome to Creating Art with Jenny. Today I am going to use an old watercolor book that it was $1 back in 1960 something. I think I only paid $1.25 for it. And I love this book because the outside is beautiful. It's all watercolor, and it's from the Grumbacher Library. And to think that you could get things for $1 back then is just amazing. And the first page also has beautiful watercolors. And it must have come with a its own palette and its own paintbrush. This is what was included in it, and also had a watercolor block. And as you continue to turn the pages, some of it's in watercolor, but most of it is in black and white. So I thought that was kind of fun and fascinating because it's teaching you how to watercolor. And some of this you're like, okay, I just got to look at the values and understand the values in order to be able to do a good job. So my goal today is I'm going to use my botanical watercolor set, and I am going to paint this zinnia. And so I have zinnias, but it is winter and mine are dead as the doorknob. So I'm going to look at the values in this, and I can see that these are darker down here and even darker right here. And I'm not going to draw mine out. I'm just going to do it free form so you can see. But using this, I'm going to see if I can't have some success with my zinnia. And then I am going to use my masking frisket to create the little pistils, the light pistils in the flower. Let's get started. So I have put down my frisket or masking liquid. I just got this Molotov. And you just shake it up, and it for the small things, that's really nice. I've never used it before, but it works quite well. I've used it for a couple of months. Now I'm ready, that's dried, and it does dry fast, to put down the outer shape of my zinnia. I'm just going to look at this, and I'm going to do a pink one. So trying not to use too much water, thinking about where this placement is because it's looking off to the side a little bit, and I just really want to think about the shape of my flower. It's more going to be an ellipse, and just kind of just putting it down. Doesn't have to be exactly perfect because I can come back in and change it when it is still wet. So as that comes, I'm just going to kind of spread all of that. And I do want my bottom to be more longer than the top. Maybe make sure I come in and exaggerate. So this needs to dry just a bit before I can come in and add my darker shadows. It's just too wet to add the darker shadows. And that's the biggest part about watercoloring, is really understanding the time to add things. And if you can let this flow like right here and it's still pretty moist, it's not the best time. You can see the shininess of it. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure I get the center of that. So I'm going to give it a second, and I can see this is a little more off here, but that's alright. I'm just going to let it be, maybe add this out just a bit. Yep. Not that they have to be perfect. Now that it's dried a bit, I'm going to drop in some of these darker cast shadows over here and just let it kind of mix and meld. And not really worrying about it, kind of just bringing it down right here. And maybe it shows some on up the top, some more of the natural shadows that a flower would have. Right, this time, this does need to dry a little bit, and you can see I have more water in there than I intended, but it will be fine. I just need to let it dry. I'm going to move it around as I let it dry, so it's not just on the edges. And I mean by move it around like doing that, but you don't need to watch that. So my base flower is dry, and I'm going to go in with a darker hue and of the pink, and I'm going to, they have these kind of outlined a little bit, so I'm going to come in and just kind of think about what would the petals kind of look like, and kind of try to mimic a little bit of what's going on in here to help define the flower and to give it some movement. I know these are going to be a little bit foreshortened, so you know, not quite as long. And you don't have to do the whole entire leaf, does, you know, petal. Just thinking about your movement and which way they're going. So I've given it a little bit of shape, and I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to come back and start dropping in some of my darker values in here, just to really shadows and things like that that are going to start defining my flower more. I sped this part up. This is just going in and dropping in those darker values to create a realistic 3D effect. And you can see that I kind of go back in a few more times, but it's just a part to show you that how I did that. Alright, it's dried, so I mixed up a little bit of a darker value, and I'm just going to drop it back in underneath, just as a little bit more of a shadow. And remember, when you do paint, when something's dry, if you don't mess with it too much, you can kind of paint in and add another layer. And that kind of helps give it a little bit of uniformity to it. But I do think that helps to add some realistic value. I'll let that dry and move on to the leaves. So using the black and white values of this, I went ahead and drew this right underneath my zinnia. And I love that, you know, this is a true way that plants grow, so I had to draw that out because I couldn't do that freehand. And so just looking at that, I'm going to go ahead and add, and I like to always start with a little bit of some yellow, just because then when you mix in your greens, it kind of gives it a little bit of variety in your color. And I do know this needs to dry a little bit, not all the way, because I'm going to drop in some darker values. But just to get it started. This is really too wet. At this point I have it too wet. If I just drop something, if I drop a darker value in now, it's just going to flood it and it's going to become the same value again. So I need to wait, and I'm going to put a little bit of a hairdryer action on it while I do that. Okay, I'm ready to drop a little bit more green in while it's here. Just kind of and if it gets too dry, you can actually, there's ways to fix that as well. So, and I might have let it get a little bit too dry. And some darker values coming in here. So I rinsed off my brush and I'm going to dry it just a little bit and bring some water right in here. And then it will help flow that in and make it look more of a natural shading. So as I let that dry, and then I'll come back in and do my stem. Before it gets too dry, I am going to take my scraper and I do want to put in some lines. So that my leaves are dry, I'm going to come in and do the first go around for my stem. And if I notice this is too much of the same color as my leaves, I'm going to try to differentiate that by making it a little bit darker. And I do know it will be darker underneath the leaf just from the shadow. So as this is drying, I am going to make this side darker because it looks flat right now, and that's okay because it's not done. And I can pick up some of this with my brush. It helps it to look more like it's 3D, and even down here it helps. So remember, you just dry your brush off. I'm just using my hands, and you pick it up, and then it creates that. You just wick away the moisture, which is pretty easy to do. And if I do it past the leaf, that'll work. And so now I want my dark in here to really accent the shadow. Watercolor, I have to tell you, I am not the most patient person in the world, and it does take patience So it's been a good thing, a good teacher for me to work on my patience.
Here's the finished product. Thank you for watching.